I still remember Maya rocking her 3-week-old while Ethan boarded up the windows during the hurricane. And I kept thinking everything was fine, but did he really feel that calm?
Maya was standing in the nursery humming softly while our 3-week-old daughter finally fell asleep against her chest. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows, and the weather reporter on TV kept warning everyone to stay indoors before the hurricane hit. My husband Ethan was downstairs boarding up the front windows, joking earlier that we were officially parents now because we owned emergency flashlights and diapers in bulk. For a little while, everything actually felt normal. Safe, even. But when I walked into the kitchen and asked Ethan if he'd been drinking again, he didn't answer right away. He just stared at me while the lights flickered once overhead. Before we continue with this video, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. I remember thinking, maybe I should have just left it alone. Not because he scared me back then. At least, not in the way he would later. It was more that Ethan had been different ever since the baby was born. Quieter some days. Irritated other days. Like every little thing inside the house was pressing against him at once. The crying, the bills, the lack of sleep, me asking him simple questions. And I kept making excuses for him because I wanted us to survive that first exhausting month together like every new couple supposedly does. He finally looked away and grabbed the cordless drill off the counter. "I had 2 beers," he muttered. "I'm boarding up the house, not partying." I nodded quickly. Okay. I was just asking. That was becoming my automatic response around him lately. Okay. Sorry. I didn't mean it like that. The rain outside started hitting harder now, rattling the kitchen window above the sink. Somewhere in the living room, the local weather alert suddenly blared from the television again. Hurricane warning. Residents advised to remain indoors. Dangerous wind conditions expected overnight. Ethan walked past me toward the hallway carrying the drill over his shoulder. For a second, as he passed, he leaned down and kissed the top of our daughter's head. And that tiny moment confused me more than anything, because that was the Ethan I kept holding on to. The man who cried in the hospital when he first held her. The man who painted the nursery himself because he said he wanted his daughter to grow up feeling safe. The man who used to wrap blankets around my shoulders whenever I got cold. I kept telling myself that version of him was still here. Dinner was simple that night. Canned soup and grilled cheese, because the grocery stores had already been wiped out before the storm. We ate in the living room while the wind outside grew louder. Ethan barely spoke through most of it, scrolling endlessly on his phone between bites while I balanced the baby against my shoulder. "You should try to sleep early," I told him carefully. "You've seemed stressed all day." "I'm fine." His answer came fast. Too fast. The baby stirred suddenly and started fussing. I stood up automatically to rock her. But before I could leave the room, Ethan sighed loudly and dropped his spoon into the bowl. "You know what your problem is?" he said without looking at me. "You always act like I'm doing something wrong." I froze beside the couch. The storm outside slammed hard against the house at that exact moment, shaking the windows just enough to make my chest tighten. And for the first time that night, home didn't feel completely safe anymore.
When Ethan finally snapped at the table, saying I always act like I'm doing something wrong, did you feel that shift too?
The weird thing about tension inside a house is that once you feel it, you start noticing every little sound around it. The ticking kitchen clock suddenly feels louder. Footsteps feel heavier. Even silence starts feeling aggressive. After Ethan snapped at me in the living room, I carried our daughter back into the nursery and shut the door halfway behind me. The baby settled almost immediately against my shoulder, her tiny fingers curling around the collar of my sweatshirt while the wind outside pushed rain against the siding. I stood there rocking her slowly, trying to calm myself down more than her. Because part of me still believed this could turn back into a normal night. Couples fought. New parents got overwhelmed. That's what I kept repeating inside my head. Downstairs, I could hear Ethan moving around the kitchen cabinets harder than necessary. A drawer slammed, then another, then silence again. I looked down at my daughter sleeping against my chest and whispered, "It's okay." But honestly, I think I was saying it to myself. About 20 minutes later, I came back downstairs after putting the baby in her bassinet. Ethan was sitting at the dining table now with another beer already open beside him. The power flickered once more, briefly dimming the lights overhead before coming back. "You want soup?" I asked carefully. "It's cold now. I can heat it back up." He shrugged without looking at me. "Forget it." I moved quietly around the kitchen, trying not to create another argument out of nothing. That had become another habit lately too, me constantly adjusting myself around his moods. Talking softer, moving softer, thinking before every sentence. And the unfair part was, I was exhausted too. I'd barely slept since giving birth. My body still hurt constantly. Some mornings I cried in the shower for no reason except being overwhelmed. But somehow Ethan acted like he was the only one carrying pressure inside this house. The storm warning interrupted the TV again. Residents are advised to stay indoors for the remainder of the evening. Ethan muted it aggressively. "You know what?" he said suddenly. "I'm getting real tired of the attitude lately." I stared at him. What attitude? The constant questioning. The looks. The way you talk to me. My stomach tightened immediately, because I genuinely didn't know what I'd done wrong this time. "I just asked if you've been drinking." "Exactly." He leaned back in the chair. "Like I'm some irresponsible idiot." "That's not what I said." "But it's what you meant." Outside, thunder cracked so loudly, the windows trembled. I glanced instinctively toward the hallway leading to the nursery. And Ethan noticed. That tiny movement seemed to irritate him even more. "There," he snapped. "That right there. Ever since the baby came, I don't even matter in this house anymore." "That's not true. You don't respect me anymore, Maya." His voice wasn't loud now. That was the part starting to scare me. Because Ethan angry was unpredictable. But Ethan quiet? That was worse. He stood slowly from the table, grabbed his beer, and walked toward the front door. Then I heard the deadbolt unlock. And without turning around, he said, "If you want to disrespect me, you can sleep outside." At first, I honestly thought he was joking. Not a funny joke. Not even a believable one. Just the kind people say during arguments when they want to sound dramatic. I gave this nervous little laugh and said, "Ethan, stop." But he didn't smile. The wind outside howled so violently against the front porch that it almost sounded alive. Rain hammered the windows hard enough to make the glass shake, and when Ethan pulled the front door open, freezing air exploded into the hallway. Papers flew off the entry table. The hallway light flickered again. "Go cool off," he said flatly. I stared at him, completely stunned. "Are you serious? You want to talk to me like I'm garbage in my own house?" he snapped. "Then go outside." "I just asked if you'd been drinking, and I'm tired of being treated like the bad guy." His voice finally rose, echoing through the house. Upstairs, the baby started crying. That sound hit me instantly. I turned without thinking and rushed toward the nursery while Ethan shouted something behind me I couldn't fully hear over the storm. My heart was pounding now, not because I believed he'd actually lock me out, but because I suddenly needed to get to my daughter. By the time I reached the nursery, she was screaming in her bassinet. The lights flickered again. I scooped her up fast, wrapping the blanket tightly around her tiny body while trying to calm her. My hands were shaking now. I could hear Ethan downstairs pacing heavily through the hallway. "Fine," he yelled from below. "Ignore me again." I should have stayed upstairs. I think about that constantly now, but part of me still believed this was fixable, that if I just talked calmly enough, carefully enough, the night could still settle down. So I carried the baby downstairs against my chest. The second I stepped into the hallway, Ethan grabbed the front door wide open again. Rain sprayed across the hardwood floor. "Ethan, stop," I said immediately. "You're scaring her." But his face looked completely different now. Cold, hurt, angry in this terrifyingly controlled way. "You think you can disrespect me whenever you want," he said. Then he grabbed my arm. Hard. Before I could even process what was happening, he shoved me backward onto the porch. The freezing rain hit me instantly. I stumbled barefoot against the wet wood while shielding the baby underneath the blanket. And then, slam, the front door shut. The deadbolt clicked immediately after. For one full second, my brain couldn't even process it. I just stood there staring through the glass at my own husband inside the house. Then panic hit all at once. I started banging on the door, hard enough to hurt my hands. Open the door. The storm roared around me. Wind whipped my hair across my face, while rain soaked completely through my clothes within seconds. The baby started crying harder underneath the blanket, tiny, desperate cries I could barely hear over the hurricane winds. Inside, Ethan stood frozen near the doorway, breathing heavily. And that's when I pulled the blanket back just enough for him to finally see her in my arms. Everything changed in his face. The anger disappeared instantly. But he still didn't unlock the door. He hesitated, and somehow that hesitation hurt worse than being thrown outside at all. The storm outside was so loud that at first, I didn't realize other people were opening their doors. I was too focused on keeping the blanket wrapped around my daughter's face, while rain soaked through everything else. My sweatshirt clung to my skin. My feet were slipping against the porch. Every gust of wind felt strong enough to rip the baby right out of my arms. And through the glass, Ethan just stood there. Not moving. Not helping. Just staring at us like he suddenly didn't know what to do anymore. I kept pounding on the door, with one hand. "Ethan, please." The baby's crying had changed now. Softer. Weaker. That terrified me more than anything. Then somewhere across the street, a porch light snapped on. A woman's voice yelled through the rain. "Oh my God!" Another front door opened nearby. Then another. Within seconds, people were outside despite the storm, standing under garages and covered porches trying to understand what they were seeing. A mother holding a newborn outside during a hurricane. One of our neighbors, Mr. Calloway, started running across the street wearing a rain jacket over pajama pants. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted. I turned back toward the door again, banging harder now. "He locked us out." The second those words left my mouth, everything changed. Because now it wasn't private anymore. Now other people knew. Inside the house, Ethan's expression shifted immediately from anger to panic. He unlocked the deadbolt so fast his hands actually fumbled with it. The door swung open. "Maya, get inside," he said quickly. "Come on." But I didn't move. And I think that shocked him more than the neighbors did. For the first time all night, the power shifted. Not because I wasn't scared. I was terrified. Freezing. Shaking so hard I could barely hold the baby steady. But the second I looked at him standing safely inside that warm house after leaving us outside, something inside me cracked permanently. "You saw the baby," I whispered. Rain blew sideways through the doorway between us. "You saw her." "Maya," I wasn't thinking clearly. "You looked right at her." Behind me, another neighbor was already on the phone yelling over the storm. "Yes, there's a baby involved." Ethan's face went pale instantly. "Don't do this," he said quietly. That sentence hit me harder than anything else. Not "Are you okay?" Not "Let me see the baby." Not "I'm sorry. Just don't do this." Like I was the problem now. Like I was about to ruin his life instead of him almost risking ours. Mr. Calloway finally reached the porch and immediately pulled his jacket around the baby to block the wind. "What is wrong with you?" he shouted at Ethan. And Ethan couldn't answer. Because there wasn't an answer good enough. Then flashing red and blue lights suddenly cut through the rain at the end of the street. And standing there shaking in the middle of the hurricane, holding my newborn against my chest, I finally looked directly at my husband and said, "You didn't lock me outside tonight. You locked your daughter out too." The police separated us the second they reached the porch. One officer rushed me and the baby into the back of an SUV with the heat blasting, while another started questioning Ethan under the flashing lights outside. I remember sitting there shaking uncontrollably, trying to warm my daughter's tiny hands while a paramedic checked her breathing. And through the windshield, I could still see Ethan pointing toward the house, trying to explain himself. But then one of the neighbors walked over holding up a phone. He had recorded everything after hearing me scream. The officers watched the video right there in the rain. They saw Ethan standing inside the house. They saw me begging him to open the door. And worst of all, they saw the moment he looked directly at the baby in my arms and still hesitated. After that, the entire tone changed. The next morning, my sister drove 3 hours through flooded roads to pick us up. I barely spoke during the ride. I just held my daughter the entire time while replaying that hesitation over and over inside my head. Because the storm itself wasn't the part that broke me. It was realizing the man I trusted most cared more about punishing me than protecting his own child. In the weeks after, neighbors gave statements. Police documented the incident. Ethan kept calling, texting, leaving voicemails saying he lost control for 1 second. But 1 second was enough, especially during a hurricane, especially with a newborn baby. People around us were shocked because Ethan had always seemed calm in public, helpful, responsible, the kind of husband neighbors complimented. They never saw the quieter things. The way I apologized constantly, the way I measured every sentence, the way his moods controlled the entire house. And honestly, I didn't fully see it either until that night. A month later, another storm rolled through while I was staying at my sister's house. I remember standing near the living room window holding my daughter while thunder shook the walls outside again. But this time, I didn't feel trapped. The doors were locked, and for the first time in a long time, I finally felt safe behind them.
After everything that happened that night, I kept thinking how a normal home can stop feeling safe. And how many people live that way without saying it, don't you think?